and Jai Gurudev. Welcome everyone. It's good to see you all today. Before we begin, let's just quickly have a quiet settle in. We come together today. We're studying Bhaja Govindam by Adi Shankaracharya. Each of us is here, present, awake, listening with our heart and our mind. Come settled into our body. Take a nice deep breath in. Allow everything to just release. Any tension, let it go. Keep breathing, nice and slow. Gently bring your awareness to that space just slightly above and between your eyes and deep within the self. This is the Ajna chakra, our third eye. Bring your awareness right there. Pull yourself in. Rein in those senses. Collect and gather. Come to this point. Gently rub your hands together, create a little warmth. And you can bring those hands right up to your closed eyes, cupping them gently. And slowly pulling these hands away. Look at them. This is called Anjali Mudra. Look at them and see how much we're given in this world. So much. We bring our hands together, come to prayer position, center it at your heart. One more nice deep breath in. We come back together in collective presence in satsang. Jai Ma, welcome. All right. Today we are going to be studying together Bhaja Govindam by Adi Shankaracharya, the great teacher of our Vedantic wisdom. He has been a profound presence in our particular lineage, in our parampara, in our sampradaya, in our lineage, and he's come to each of us. Let us start our day with honoring our lineage, and we will say together our lineage prayers. And for those of you who are new to this is our opening prayers. We are honoring and naming and welcoming not only the profound teachers that have come before us, but this profound knowledge and this whole profound setup. All of the setup that we're here together, experiencing together, coming home to, and finding meaning in. Please join me. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Shanti Prakashaya Namaha. Om Ayodhyanataya Namaha. Om Shunyacharya Namaha. Om Atmatattvam Namaha. Om Vidyatattvam Namaha. Om Suryaya Namaha. Harihi Om Tat Sat. All right, so what are we doing together today? If you're joining us live, welcome. If you are joining us via the recording, let's do a quick overlook of what is this? What is this companion study? My name is Sadhvi Aparna, and we are here today to... Sachira, could you share that slide on what are we doing? What are we here for? All right, so my name is Sadhvi Aparna. I have been studying with Acharya Shunya for many, many years, and I have been contemplating these teachings for a very long time. Not only Bhaja Govindam, which is new to me as well over the last 6 months, almost 7 months now, but also these Vedantic concepts and teachings and incorporating each of them. Acharya Shunya shares that these Vedic teachings are like, we consider it a kind of a circular learning. So some of these concepts will come up in one text and then another and then another. It isn't as though we have to know everything from one. All of it is pointing to the same singular unified truth. And we're going to be exploring that. So in this limited series, the Bhaja Govindam Companion Study, we are going to be exploring 8 themes that arise in this Moha Mudgara, which is another name for Bhaja Govindam, the text, and that Moha Mudgara, which means the hammer that lays blows on our ignorance and this illusion that we're all experiencing. Today we are going to be exploring one of the themes, which is about impermanence. And so over the next several months, we'll be experiencing 4 key ways in which we want to let go. How are we thinking and what do we want to let go of? And then, and this is all related to Samsaara, which we'll talk about today. And then 4 key ways in which we may find liberation from the Samsaara. So our freedom from this illusion. And for those of you who are experiencing these teachings possibly for the first time, I highly encourage you to go back and watch the Acharya Shunya original Bhaja Govindam teachings. And those are all on a playlist on YouTube. Or you can join our Vedic study circle and you will have both complete teachings and texts and, of course, this companion study group and our forum. So, thank you. All right, so today we're going to start our discussion on all these themes. We're going to explore impermanence. So impermanence, let's look at, we just mentioned the 4 themes that we're going to be letting go, and I'll just refresh that for you just so you kind of have it in your mind, and we'll keep referring to these. So these are the things that we're going to be looking at can we let these things go from our life? This is what Bhaja Govindam is asking us to do, is start to let go of things. This entire text could be seen as a treatise on letting go, on releasing, on finding a healthful detachment, a disassociation. That's called Vairagyam, with our most closely held illusions. So today we're going to be exploring impermanence, the impermanence of life, and specifically we're looking at, we've already looked at verse 1, But that will come up as a refrain again and again. But more specifically, we're talking about verses 4, 10, 12, and 15. Now, you don't have to have studied these prior to today in depth, but as we move forward, I encourage you after today, you might want to go and re-listen and watch some of these. All right. So we're going to... Thank you, Suchara. So we're going to be looking at this impermanence of life piece. So in these specifically those four verses. Now, impermanence comes up again and again in this text, and you'll find it again and again. And we will see in verse 4 specific, so let's talk about impermanence generally. All right, what does it mean by impermanence of life? We think, what are we holding on to? We actually think that life is permanent. All of us do. We actually all think that life is permanent. We think we have all the time in the world. We think that everything is always as it will be. Even when with our conscious mind we realize that this isn't actually true. Things are constantly changing. But we act as though life is is permanent. We act as though our actions are focused most on how we, how many of us have gotten involved in catastrophic thinking, right? Or this is always the way it's going to be. Nothing ever goes my way. Everything is always a certain way, a certain action, a certain being. We also take it cavalierly, right? We are believing, it's the nature of this, that we are, not only is life permanent, but everything is stagnant, and that we have all of the time in the world. So we self-identify with our desires and our addictions and our delusions, thinking that those are real, that those desires are permanent. And this is how we stay trapped in samsara. There's a story that Acharya Shunya gave that is really pertinent to this, and this is why I had the deer. You may remember from the teachings that there's a story of Jadabharata and the deer that Shunyaji gave in one of her teachings early on in this series. And in that, we meet a yogi who is very renowned. He's very wise. He has this knowledge of the self. He knows in many ways that life is impermanent. He has been working deeply on his journey to self. He is connecting with Govindam. He is connecting with God. And yet, he finds on his meditations, he found, in the woods, he's meditating, and he found a baby deer. And this person who was so removed and so clear and so removed from his desires, in this moment, he saw this baby deer and he was moved. He was moved by his compassion. He was moved by his compassion to rescue this deer. And he loved this deer, and he raised this deer. This little fawn, he raised it to an adult deer. And he cared for it, and he babied it like we all baby our dear ones. And he fed it the best foods, and he worried about it. Of course, we all worry about our pets. How are they doing? What's happening? Now, Jadabharata, this wise yogi who everyone came to and all of these things, he was very close to enlightenment before this happened. And he was also very close to the end of his time on this planet. He was very close to death. He was aged. And after a lifetime of dedicating himself to to Jnana and Bhakti Yoga, at the very end, he found this deer and he found this baby, and he took care of this baby deer and helped it to grow. And his last moments, he worried about that deer. He was worried, as many of us do, and we have these worries about, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to this thing that I love, this person, this deer, this animal, this job, this setup, whatever the thing is that we love, our desires our connections, our attachments are what hold us here. And so in that moment, Jadabharata, his final thoughts were of his poor dear. What was going to happen to his poor dear? Those were his final thoughts, this great and renowned yogi. And they're not evil thoughts. That's a wonderful thought. It's a beautiful thought. We care for the ones we love. His last thoughts were of compassion. But what Bhaja Govindam is telling us overall is that we have a limited time here. Life is not permanent. This moment is temporary. So all throughout, these are the hammers that are coming down, okay? Here's a hammer. Life is not permanent. Your life could be over in a moment. Your life could be over in the future. We don't know. Those thoughts that occupy us in those final moments determine because we are not this body, we are not this mind, we are not this soul, single living experience. So what's happening next? What happens with that consciousness next? Where does this mind go? It goes right back on the same journey, only in another body. Another body. Okay, so then we take a new body. All right, but we come into that next phase with the same thoughts. We can see this in our everyday life. We come to our next experience with the same thoughts. How many times have you observed in others or even in yourself that you have, maybe there's a relationship. I broke up with that person. He wasn't the one or she wasn't the one. I'm done with that. And then found yourself recreating that same issue with the next person or the next person. It could be in a job. How many of us have had a job experience which I'll never go back to that again, that same kind of thing, and then found ourselves recreating the same experience at a new place? This is what this story is talking about. We can understand it in the terms of what happened to Jadabharata. He was born again, but instead of releasing himself from this trap of samsara, instead of letting things fully go, he still held on. And so he was born in the body of a deer. So he came back in the body of a deer. But he had all this knowledge, and he had all this wisdom, and he had all this, this deep well of familiarity with these concepts. So he was born as a deer near an ashram and then attended satsangs, as many of our animals do. How many of our pets that join us in our satsangs with Acharya Shunya? I can tell you all 3 of ours do. Yeah, I see a lot of raised hands. Yeah, all of our pets are taking advantage of this. So perhaps our animals that deign to join us are another great soul that came very close, but was concerned about their pet or their animal, but gets the benefit of satsang, gets the benefit of this. And the story of Jadabharata is that indeed he did in that next life, he was able to wholly hone his focus on enlightenment, on knowing Govindam, and did achieve enlightenment. But what we're presented with in that story, and what I contemplated on in that story, is how many times we find ourselves not being aware of what is happening with our thoughts and our consciousness. So we recreate again and again. How many of us have had lifetime after lifetime just in this body, just in this lifetime, and yet found ourselves recreating those same patterns, those same relationships, those same dynamics, the same sukha, temporary happiness, and then dukkha, sorrow and grief. And so these desires, these attachments, these addictions even, these are all wrapped up in our understanding, our wrong understanding that we think that life is permanent, and we think that any of these decisions, without exploring the underlying binds, without exploring those underlying delusions, we think that somehow we will constantly be changing with no impact. We will have the next thing will make us happy. The next thing will be the thing that will serve us. And what Bhaja Govindam and what Adi Shankaracharya is telling us is that life is limited. This time in this life is limited. And we have to understand what delusions there are that are binding us. And then what do we do with that? We have to turn towards this one truth, Govindam. Are we feeling some urgency? Some urgency to not recreate. Yes, yes. Let's not recreate those same lifetimes. We gain, there's a tendency, I think, within any of us, all of us, especially spiritual aspirants, I think, to hear of this knowledge, hear the knowledge of the transmigration of souls, that there is this continuance, to feel maybe a little bit resting on our laurels, or maybe a little bit of, well, there's always next lifetimes. What Adi Shankaracharya has said in other texts, including Viveka Chudamani, is that this is the only lifetime that we know that we have access to this knowledge. Right now, we know we have access to a teacher. We know we have access to this knowledge. We know we have access to satsang, which we'll discuss more and more over the course of this companion series. We know we have access to right thinking, enlightened thoughts. Take advantage of this. We don't know in the future. We don't know the next life, but we do know now. And so this is the urgency with which Bhaja Govindam hits us with, of like, these are the hammer blows. Take action, take action. Let's look at verse 4. I'm working on my pronunciation for future teachings, but for now I'm going to say the English. There are some beautiful recordings. This is meant to be sung and chanted and felt and experienced. I encourage all of you to find some of these chantings. You can also, if you're a member of the Vedic Study Circle, there are some links to some pretty profound chantings of this. Of this text, and it's a very popular bhajan, and so you'll find many of them and feel them. But for now, we're going to say these in English. We're using Acharya Shunya's translation. Now, these are translated and informed by her teachings. They are from the Sanskrit, but with a little bit more fleshed out so we can understand it. The life of a person is as uncertain as raindrops trembling on a lotus leaf. Know that the whole world remains a prey to disease, ego, and grief. Each of our lives they're trembling like a raindrop on a lotus leaf. And if you know anything about lotus leaves, they are extremely, I think it's hydrophobic. Water just slides right off of them. And this is part of the magic of the lotus. You can let that go, Suchira. This is part of the magic of the lotus. Not only does the lotus blossom grow up out of this soil, this mucky, sticky, gross, stale water of the pond, but also the leaves cast it off. The leaves actually cast it off, like nothing sticks to it. It's an important understanding to see that clarification of like, if our life is so impermanent, and we think we're holding on for dear life, thinking that it's real, but at any moment, a gust of wind, anything, a disease, an experience, a moment, anything can cast off this illusion of impermanence, of permanence. So what are we here to understand? What are we here to understand about that? So this is telling us that like this again, this hammer of like, you don't have a choice. You think you do, you don't. It's uncertain. anything can happen. We think we can control everything. We cannot. What can we control? The only thing we control essentially is what we focus on. And so contemplating that, Bhaja Govindam is, it's helping us, these contemplations are here to help us to reveal what our innermost thoughts are that are holding us to things. And then it's asking us to explore, to question, to interrogate that, and then to let go, so that we can no longer be ruled by our delusions, by these desires. So if we know that the whole world remains a prey to disease, ego, and grief, what is that? Let's go on to this. What does this mean? What's this disease that the whole world is prey to? And this is the pathology of our ego. What if our ego is a disease? All right, me, myself, and I. Who's important? Who's important? Who is driving this sense of permanence? Who thinks that life is permanent? Who thinks that their desires must be met? Who thinks that life is happening to them? We all do. So everyone suffers from the same disease, and Acharya Shunya called it out. It's called abhimana. That is egotism, conceit, or pride. But I want us all to think, like, what does that look like? What does a subtle egotism, conceit, or pride mean? This is not necessarily the egotism of an adharmic person. It's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily have to be related to an evil. We all have it. This is why Shankaracharya says we're all suffering from this disease. Everyone the whole world over. Each and every one of us is suffering from this. We all, and this is the nature of it. This is the nature of what holds us on. So we have this, and go back to that slide. When we say egotism, we mean that identification with the ego, or the ahamkara. We think that we are separate. We think that we are our own person, our own being, separate, unrelated, unattached. And yet, this fuels all of these attachments. From this limited sense of self, and this is the essential illusion. This is the moha. That's the confusion that we have in samsara. So this limited sense of self tries to control life, to make things go our way. We're always trying to control it. This is this, does everyone here think that even if they catch themselves, do you think that you have an effect on this planet in a way that you can control? Can you control everything? Do you act in a way as though you can control everything? Do you act in a way or think in a way that is limited to what is happening to you? Everyone, all of us do. Yeah, we all do. When our desires aren't met, or when that temporary bliss we got when our desire was met, when that ends, we start to feel something. We feel grief. Every change that happens inspires a feeling of grief. And whether we recognize it as such or not, it's our frustration. It's our agitation. It's our sadness. It's our self-pity. It is all of the ways in which and maybe not even so overtly as that, maybe it's also, this grief can also be experienced in our frustration with the setup, right? Yeah. So why is the world like this? What is happening? Why is this happening to me? What's going on? These are good questions to begin an interrogation of this. So what's happening to me is a small way of starting to interrogate our understandings and our desires. But let's look at how that happiness that we think will come from any number of things, how it falls away, right? It's not going to last as long as we stay identified with this ego. This is the promise of verse 4 tells us this, like just know that the whole world, every single being in this whole world remains a prey to disease. We can't stop disease. We can't stop this disease of the ego. The nature of the nature of samsara is impermanent. Everyone is a prey to this samsara. We all fall into it. And it's all based on our identification with our small self, our identification with who we think we are, and how the world relates to that small self, and how we think it relates, and our grief at when those desires are not met. How's that make you feel? Anyone want to chime in? Chime in on the chat? You're welcome to. We're going to explore today a few ways of getting into that. But all of this to say, and you're welcome to chime in on the chat, all of this to say, and this is why it's the hammers, right? This is the Moha part of, the Mudgara part of the Bhaja Govindam, is acting as this hammer. So we know that we can see that nothing is permanent, right? We're watching in real time as some of our most closely held institutions are showing their cracks and their impermanence, right? We all, throughout every era of humanity, we have our, every single era of people has thought that their time would not end, that their empire would not fall, that their religion would be permanent, that their family line would be forever, that their environment would never change, that their river would never run dry, that their food would always be full. We all have these thinkings. We all think that everything is permanent, and find ourselves not only horrified but personally offended when when it shows that it is not permanent, right? How many of us are like, aren't we offended? Doesn't that come up, that offense of like, how dare reality show itself for what it is? And right there, these questions that the ego asks, I myself ask those same questions. What, how dare, there's that part of, and that part of the self, especially for spiritual aspirants who have done a lot of ego purification, who have done a lot of work on recognizing things that they are, paying attention to those subtle influences, those subtle parts of where I'm not attached to this. And yet, when things come up, start paying attention. What is coming up for you? And when you hear that inner voice that says, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Why is this happening to me? How dare that happen? This isn't right. Start exploring that. This mananam, this contemplation, these are the subtle points that we need to start really diving into, because it reveals those parts of us that are, those deep innermost thoughts that are revealed as Jadabharata was revealed. His innermost thoughts were not about, the collapse of things, but his innermost thoughts were about, this relationship, this caring. So where are your innermost thoughts focused on? You can explore that. And we'll go through. There's a few shares in the chat. Elizabeth, appreciating deeply what you said about how change and impermanence brings grief. And I felt in my heart that the reason we feel grief is because our true self is actually permanent as Atman. The reason we feel grief is because we are identified with a belief that is counter to that true self. Right? So if we really can remember and connect, and this is what this is asking us to do again and again, is if we can remember and connect with that knowledge that what is permanent is something else, that there is permanence, but it's not what we think. I mean, it's not our choices, it's not our relationships, it's not our jobs, it's not our teams, it's nothing here. There is something more. And how do we find it? Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Go, turn yourself again and again towards Govindam, towards that eternal. So yes, Elizabeth, towards what is permanent. And what we're seeing here, especially in these first 7 to 12 verses, is going to be all of the ways in which we see what is not permanent. And so it's hammering in, look, you think this is, but it's not. You think this is, that's not true. Where is it going to go? What's going to happen? Yeah, and David shares that the layers of impermanence seem endless. Yeah, and this is where if we break it down into, this is the way the ego mind works is to break things down into ever smaller and smaller minutia, right? There's an endless amount of diversity of desire. There's an endless amount of, like we can find, oh, but mine is a little different. My situation is a little different. Mine, like all of us think we are different. And we are all precious, beautiful, individual fingerprints of God, right? And yet, there is something overall to look at. And this is why if we can accept and really explore that, like, first things first, and this is why impermanence is first. Let's look at it. This is not permanent. Whatever you think is, it is not. This is why we're asked to first let go of impermanence. Let go of our attachment to all of these things that we're clutching onto that we think are forever. And it gets subtler and subtler. And the grief actually, gets more and more profound as we realize that the things that we thought we were holding on to, which were like these little things that occupy us in our everyday, right? There's all these little minutia of like, well, this is important. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to buy that. I want that. I want that. I don't want that. I do want that. All of these small things. And then as you start to peel away those, it's easy, right? To let go of some of these things, right? It's easy and it feels good. We can feel pious about, I'm letting go of consumerism. My consumption, I'm letting go of that, right? And we feel good about, I'm letting it go. And then we start to get to the real meat of the matter, which is these deep innermost thoughts on the setup and what we are holding on to. And that's what Bhaja Govindam is for. It's actually not for, Bhaja Govindam is not a beginner text in truth. It's really not. So good you're all here. Look at you ready to receive these teachings and this knowledge. Yeah. And Rochelle asks, along with the hammers, Acharya Shunya talked about the flowers. And yes, what does that mean? So the flowers, there's the hammers. The hammers are what are breaking us away from these concepts and these questions that we'll keep diving into over the next several months. These concepts and questions and things that we're holding on to so dearly and asking us to let those go. Let it go. Grammarian, remember the whole first verse started off with Shankaracharya coming across this aged grammarian, aged Sanskrit scholar, and saying, what are you doing? Your time is limited. You do not have an endless amount of time here. Focus on what matters. Turn your attention to God. Turn your attention to Govindam. Turn your attention to that which is permanent. So the flowers are all of the tools that bring us there. And we're given those too. We're not just left like, let all this go and good luck to you. That's not the point. We're also in the same text given tools for how do we find our way out of that, and how do we stay out of that? And that is the guru, the satsang, this knowledge of self, the study of the Bhagavad Gita. All of these are mentioned. So we'll go into those flowers. Those are the things we're going to pick up. So the first four themes are what we're letting go of, and those are those hammers that are helping us to let go of them. And then the next 4 themes are all the flowers we're going to pick up. Yeah. So stay alert.
Varnaji, there is another share from Victoria in the chat.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Victoria says, I heard someone say recently, Christmas just isn't the same. This got me thinking that nothing ever stays the same. Can I bring a sense of curiosity to life never being the same? Ma
Yeah.
and life is always creating something new.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that is the setup. I think accepting that nothing is ever the same is a very good process to letting go of our attachment to that. So we have the things like exploring first. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go on with that. So first is our first step is to be able to discern what is impermanent and what is permanent. To start to look at that nascent like query really does come from first observing. Can we observe, like Victoria said, things aren't the same? Okay, that's a first step. Things aren't the same. And not only are things not the same, but let me look to that part of me, look to that part of you that wanted things to stay the same. Does that make sense? That's the part that we're exploring here. What is it's good to start. Yes, things are always changing. They're never the same. Things are impermanent in this whole setup. And that's beautiful. We can flit from, flower to flower, experience to experience. It's good to know so that we don't attach so hard. But now let's kind of get in a little deeper and understand what is the part of me or of you that as spiritual seekers wanting to know the self. What is that part of us that wants it to stay the same? That felt like it should stay the same, that had the experience of, oh, it's not the same as it was. And that's the part that's the part we're hammering in on. Yeah, the creator and of the driver of that thought, and that is the mind, the ego, the ahamkara. So yeah, hope that helps. We're just going to keep diving in. So we're working on discernment, right? Viveka, or discernment. It's roughly translated as discernment, but Acharya Shunya gave a beautiful, just clear description, and I'm going to talk about that, which is Viveka is the right discernment. It's not just discernment, it's the right discernment between truth and appearance, between the shadow of the ahamkara and the self. So, so with that, we want to understand, like, is it it's not just the discernment between good or bad, adharmic and dharmic, right? We've had those discerning experiences, right? Each of us has been diving into what is dharmic behavior, right? This is why study of Bhagavad Gita is so important. It helps us to understand that kind of discernment between right and wrong, between moral and immoral, ethical and unethical, that which sustains us all to that which collapses all. But there's also another discernment, and this is what we're really starting to hone in on, which is outside of how we can properly navigate samsara. Can we also understand that samsara exists? Can we also understand that there is something beyond, that this thing is not permanent and therefore is not absolute reality, is not ultimate reality, is not ultimate consciousness, and that there is an ultimate consciousness. There is, and that is the truth of the self, the truth of eternal consciousness. So Viveka, that correct discernment, will naturally lead to Vairagyam, or a dissociation from the unreal. So as we start to be able to discern, and this is where this questioning comes in, without this coloration of all of our attachments and our desires and our drives, if we can see beyond them, to see beyond to something more, then we what will be revealed as we let go of our Vairagyam is sometimes translated as detachment, but I think it's better to say it's a dissociation. So, meaning that currently we associate ourselves with what appears to be real, right? I'm this color, I'm this gender, I'm this race, I'm this ethnicity, I'm this country, I'm of this country, I have this belief, all of these ways in which we associate ourselves with form and matter and impermanence. I am this body, I am this disease, I am this what is the I am engaged in? That part of us is constantly engaging in associating ourselves with something that is not absolute reality. So what Vairagyam can be, and with right discernment to know what it is that we're associating or disassociating with, then we can start to not just detach from those things. Oh, it doesn't matter to me. It's not important to me. But rather, we disidentify with it. We no longer have to stay so closely held to those beliefs, those relationships, those significant engagements, this body. We can start to release that. And then what happens once that, and it's called a coloration, or it's from Ranja or Ragyam, is this coloration. Without that wrong coloration over the sight of the self, then we see the self. And so Bhaja Govindam is here to evoke questions that are going to help us to hone that discernment. All right. So this is a good time for a contemplation. I hope you brought a journal or something to write in. Let's take a few minutes, and I'm going to ask you a few questions and just start thinking about it. I'll put it up on the screen. Thank you. This will be up here, and you can refer back to it because this may take longer than a few minutes for your contemplation. And I would say this is a good, as we're starting, these companion series are meant to invoke your own contemplations. So here's something to think about. Name all the areas and the reasons in your life right now that you feel unfulfilled. What needs to change in your life for you to feel happy, to feel safe, to feel fulfilled, to feel satisfied, to feel pleasure? Where are you unfulfilled? And just think on that for a few minutes. We'll write on that for, let's say 2 minutes. And you don't have to jump ahead. Just think on that. What's currently keeping you unfulfilled? What's currently making you unsatisfied? What would make you more satisfied? I'm guessing right off the bat, we could come up with, maybe half a dozen or more things, right? That are keeping us unfulfilled, unsafe, unhappy, unsatisfied. Now here's a question, and I want you to think about it. What if none of those things changed? Just think on it. What does it feel like? What does it bring up for you? What if nothing that's currently pissing you off, making you frustrated, annoying you, feels like it's harming you or feels unsafe or just not going your way? What if none of those things changes? How do you feel? What thoughts come up? And now we've tapped into that feeling. And you can stop to share. So we got very quickly, we're able to tap into what our desires are, right? We see what isn't going right, or we have a list. We all have a list of all of the, we have a list inside each of us, and it changes and it grows and it shrinks and it gets, it goes in all these, but we have our list of metrics, and some of those are revealed immediately and some of those take a little bit longer to reveal themselves. But what is helpful about questioning is the opposite. What if the opposite is true? What if you don't experience any of those? What if none of those desires are met? What if each of those is another symptom of this disease? What would it be like to acknowledge that each of us individually, is seeing things unclearly, is misperceiving the nature of our experience? How does that resonate for you, and how does it make you feel? These are the kinds of questions that help us to start to kind of get behind the veil, right? I find personally, for me, I'm not always as aware of my immediate motivations as much as I'm aware of them through the reflected grief that comes up, through the reflected tone of when those unexamined expectations were not met. This is often very revealing for me. Oh, I didn't even know I had that attachment until it wasn't met. So exploring that part and what comes up, because again, this is all an illusion. It's just as real for your ego to have this conversation right now as it is if it was happening in real time. It's just as real for the mind. So this is an illusion, right? Because it's just as real. We each was everyone able to experience a feeling at the thought of not getting something? I see some nodding heads. Yeah, immediately it came up for you, right? Just as real as if it had just as real as if it had happened right now in the world. And yet here we are. We're in this nice little cozy space together exploring. So right there, we start to see, oh, this is an illusion. All of this is an illusion because it's just as real for this part of me. What is behind that? This is the way that we can start to dig in with Mananam, dig in with our contemplations, dig into a deeper truth than what is happening every moment of every day Every microsecond, this brain is working, this ego is running its little programs, always, always, always. So how do we get past it? Start questioning. Why is, if you're in the world, why is this happening for me? Not just to me, because the ego goes, why is this happening to me? My unmet desires, my grief, this impermanence, this change, why is it happening for me? That's just that one word can start to change our questioning. Why do I want this? Is it true? Do I really want this? What is happening? So keep asking these kinds of questions. All right. Does anyone want to share anything in the chat? You're welcome to. About your experience, you're welcome to share that. Then we'll go on to, as you do, we'll come back to that. So let's go on to, ultimately, we're looking at this impermanence. Samsara is a creation of the mind, ignorant to the truth of its own nature. We then become and create a life stuck in the ebb and flow of samsara. Acharya Shunya shared that quote. As we, Suchara, can you bring that slide up? So we just saw how, like, even in that one contemplation, sorry, the one right before it. Yeah. Even in that one contemplation that we just had, we saw how powerful the mind is, that the mind can create this ego, this self-driven desire creating machine can create an experience that feels real, that feels permanent, and yet it went away. That went away in a couple seconds. And we're doing that all the time. So the reason we're doing it is because we are not focused on, we don't realize that this whole impermanent part is not real. It's not absolute. It's not the truth. And so once we have that truth of Govindam, that truth of samsara no longer exists. That's what that last verse is saying in verse 4, that last section. It's saying that once we have that truth, the dream of samsara no longer exists. And then when it no longer exists, we're free. We can be in life. We can be in our jobs. We can be in our relationships, but we are not bound by the delusion. We're free. All right. And let's move on. We're going to go on to verse 12 now, or verse 10, sorry. This is another questioning. Let's talk. Verse 10 is another, contextually relates not only to the relationships that we'll go into and our senses, but it relates to this idea of impermanence. So what good is lust when youth has fled? What use is a lake which has no water? Where are the relatives when wealth is gone? Where is samsara, the world, when the truth is known? So again, Bhaja Govindam is giving us questions to ask ourselves, experiencing these questions, and keep going. What are the questioning? So questioning. And not just questionings, but sitting with those questions. Someone shared in the chat that contemplation was very powerful, to observe how the emotions came up and quickly subsided when you brought us back to the room. How can we bring us back to the self when we are in the thick of these emotions? That is, I mean, to some extent, it's just that easy. It's just that easy. It's so easy. All you have to do is remember that none of this is absolute reality. It's just so simple, right? Okay, it's not so simple. So in that moment, it is simple if we could remain in that space of awareness, of super consciousness, which is to say, how do we get there? Again and again, we're going to start start invoking this line of questioning into those parts of our life which are maybe not fraught in that moment. So your morning meditation, your evening reverie, your times where you have the wherewithal to take that deep breath and remind yourself, or to ask, is this really important to me? Is this absolute? Is this going to matter tomorrow? Is this going to, is my experience in the past, does it point to this being a permanent part? So the more that we invoke these kinds of questions in our own life, the more we habituate our thinking, so that in those final moments, and sometimes the final moment is at the moment of death, but sometimes those final moments are before we blow up our life. Final moments can be, so the more that we cultivate this line of questioning for ourselves, the more we do this mananam and remind ourselves and remind ourselves and remind ourselves, wait, I might be having a wrong thought. This might not be absolute truth. This might be misperception. Let me hold to this. Let me hold to this possibility. The more we train our mind to be a tool for us instead of being a victim of samsara and a victim of our desires. Yeah. Someone also shared that they're experiencing this right now with eye issues. As we're talking about not seeing clearly, she's grappling with the possibilities that her eyes will not return to normal, healthy functioning. These bodies are also diseased. They age, they break down, they die. Cultivating an awareness that even this vessel that we embody is frail and fragile, and and it's going away too. It is also impermanent. And so can we acknowledge that things are changing, that this thing that we saw, this work is not meant, and this is why it's an advanced piece, this work is not meant to encourage each of us not to engage in the world. It's not meant to say that the fact that your eyesight is going is no big deal, and why are you even worried about it? That's not what this is saying. This is advanced work of the inner seeker, and it's about, do I identify so closely with the fact that my eyesight is going that I cannot see the truth of the self? Am I so closely identified to this terrible, frustrating thing happening that I don't see that it may also be, is this something for me? Is this something happening to me or something happening for me? What are the ways in which, not that we don't have the experience, but what are the ways in which we can disassociate a little bit from that experience and our identification with it, to see that we are not our eyes, and we are not our eyesight, and we are not even this life. And that who we are is someone that will be born again with new eyes. Maybe you'll be born again with many eyes. Maybe we don't know. These identifications are run so deeply. We are so identified with every single part. So it doesn't mean, especially we're Hasta lineage. We come from a householder lineage. And each of these people that you see behind me, each of these people that came before us was intimately engaged in reality as we know it, intimately engaged in experiencing the slings and arrows of life as they come. So, and yet, can we turn Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam? Can we turn our attention to that which is all seeing, that which is all permanent, that which is never blind, ultimate consciousness? Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. And get ourselves to the hospital and get ourselves to the doctor and do all the things, because that also comes along. There are two things. There's what's happening there's karma kand, what's happening in the world, what we're working on and navigating samsara. That's one thing. And then there's also, let's be aware that samsara is the setup, and that there's something behind, underneath, and supporting all of that. All right. So the questions that we asked in verse 10, what's the good of this? What, when lust is, why do we even have lust when our youth is gone, and what's the point of a lake bed with no water, um, and we're really entreated to explore all of those attachments that we have to, like, it should be this way, it has to be this way, why isn't this way? All right, we have another share. Two other shares. Let's see. Victoria shares, my challenge is around relationships. I've been interrogating my mind when it starts to play victim and blame. With Shraddha, or faith, she sees people as classrooms who are intentionally put in my path to teach me. What am I learning? It isn't always easy when in the thick of it, but sometimes I respond well, and other times I fall into samsaric responses. Yeah, there's definitely the way that we can shift our perception in one way, right? And one of the best ways to start to shift our perception is around that victim aggressor mentality, right? Is that we are, as Victoria said, like that what if this person, it's an initial stage, I think an important one, to say, wait, my ego right now is saying, like, you're doing this to me, you're my enemy, this is not good. And this part of, wait, but I am in relationship, I am in dynamic, and this is Ishvara as well. So even more than a classroom, which again, still, it's a good start, like the classroom, like, but it's still coming from that, it's still the me, mine, I'm still separate from you, I'm still, it's better. I would say it's qualitatively better for sure. It's a little bit more sattvic. It's definitely like helping you to achieve more space in between your feeling and that reaction, whatever that reaction might be. It might be to lash out. It might be to disengage, whatever those reactions are. So creating space in that. This is, again, how we work with navigating samsara, right? And then there's another level of, like, we're navigating samsara. You're navigating it effectively, strategically, right? This is the nature of dharma, right? You're navigating it with high ethics and morality, and this is good. So it's a good way of navigating, more sattva, more consciousness. And also, is there another way to also see, even like to pull even a little bit farther into that query and wonder, is that God? Is that Ishvara? Is that Govindam? Not the form, the unmet expectations, the whatever is coming up in the relationship, but what is the truth of that oneness? And so this is something that you can keep churning. It's important that we know how to navigate with positive karma, positive karmic merit. This idea of, like, there's punyam and there's papam. Like, what we do, all of our actions are generating either more beneficial karma or less beneficial karma. And so navigating samsara is about, we want to act in ways that are navigating ethically, that are, acting dharmically. And what this text and what these teachings are asking us to do is to say, okay, and now put that aside, and realize that even our association with relationships, as wonderful as they are, as necessary as they are, we're human, we need them. And even that, those relationships are not absolute permanent truth. All right, and we'll get into relationships probably the next time, is probably when we'll dive into those. All right, Soham shares, when posed with the possibility of what happens if nothing in my life changes, a part of me felt let down and a bit hopeless. Like, what's even the point then? Yeah, did that come up for other people? Yeah, what's even the point then? Good. That's the hammer right there. And then another impulse came forward that a solution. We're always seeking solutions, right? would be to go inward and to deepen the connection with Ishvara, God self, and to develop detachment. And that felt like going home to this part. Yeah. That's why, that exactly right there is why that hopeless part. Who's hopeless? What's hope? Asha, what's that hope? Remember Acharya Shunya taught at one point on how our hope, or that asha, is also a bind. We hope for things to be different. We hope. And that's also how we're attaching to wanting things to be permanent, wanting things to stay the same. Even our desires, we want them to stay the same. And then when faced with, well, clearly we have to pivot, or clearly we have to do something, or clearly this is all impermanent, then like what comes up, that hopelessness is the grief that she's talking about. That is that shoka, that grief. And so what do? We turn to God, turn to Govindam. Bhaja Govindam. As Soham said, yeah, exactly. That, that feels like going home, because it is going home, because it's revealing that part that's like, no, even those most closely held parts, we want to hold so closely onto, and they're not bad. They're not evil. They're not wrong. But just keep diving into that. Yeah. And so finally shares, I don't think that this feeling of home, coming to that Govindam, Ishvara, God self part, and really working on that detachment, he doesn't think that he would have been able to do that without years of study and practice of this knowledge. Yeah. I mean, this is why this is an advanced text. And if you're coming to this new, if this is one of your first experiences, then you're in, we don't know Ishvara's timing, but know that this is not easy work. There's a reason why a big old bludgeon hammer, it's called a hammer. It's not called a dainty little cozy, wool blanket. It's a hammer. But take faith and take heart that there is home, and it's not any of this. And this is how we come home to the self. Pragya felt a deep desire to escape when all this came up. Yeah, run away. We all want to run away. That's why we keep charging after the next desire, right? I think that's really powerful to realize, like, there is part of us that is always knowing. And then there's part of us that is always trying to run away. Tune into that. Tune into that part, that consciousness. That part of us that wants to run away is driving things. That part of us that wants to escape is the desire manufacturer. That's the Ahamkara. That's the desire creator, and that's the part that, until we've really gotten to the heart of it, is what's going to come with us lifetime after lifetime, relationship after relationship, job after job. It's that part of us that doesn't want to see, that doesn't want to look, and that doesn't want things to be impermanent. It doesn't want it. We want it to be forever the way, so we don't have to think about it, right? Don't all of us want things just to stay the same so we can just get a handle on stuff? That's a natural desire. That's the desire of the ego. I don't want to have to think about it. I don't want to have to feel this. I just want to be able to go on in my happy little world, getting my little desires met, sipping of the nectar of the flower, feeling, bathing in the warmth of the sun, always springtime, always beautiful, always easy. Yeah, me too. All of us do. Yes. Yeah, we all do. And here comes that hammer. There's never a time when those things have been stable even. There's never been a time when they've been permanent. Yeah. Verse 12, again, hammers at home. Let's pull this up. Verse 12 says, daylight and darkness, dusk and dawn, winter and springtime come and go. Time plays and life ebbs away. But this storm of desire never leaves. Still, we're sitting with these desires. We're still stuck in them. So getting to the heart of what those desires are. let's go on. Let's have a quick contemplation together around this desire. If you can move that slide to the next one. Yeah. So in verse 12, we saw that Shankara is bringing attention to the cyclic nature of our unchecked desires, right? So we're saying, like, again and again, it doesn't matter how old we're getting, we still have these desires. We're still, like seasons are passing, and yet we still have the same. We still don't want to look. We still don't want to experience. We still don't want to feel. We still want things to stay the same. And what happens again and again? Again, more desires. Again, we stay occupied with samsara, with our everyday life, with things staying the same, with permanence. We want everything to be permanent. And again, we're shown it's not, but again, we try again. And just like this bug caught in a fly trap, he smells something he wants and he's stuck there, and again keeps doing it, and he's staying stuck. So what are the repeating patterns that keep showing up in your life again and again? Let's think on that. What are you holding on to? We talked a little bit about those, those cycles that keep showing up. Are there cycles in your life that keep showing up? Maybe it's in relationship. Maybe it's in jobs. Maybe it's in your health, or maybe wherever you're experiencing patterns that you've started to grok onto, you started to see those patterns. What are some of those? Let's write it down. All right, let's come back. By now, I'm guessing some of those patterns showed up earlier in your earlier contemplation. Probably, right? There were some repeating patterns that are also those parts of you that felt unfulfilled before. You're seeing some of those patterns. There's ways of addressing patterns. We have so many wonderful tools. And also, at this point, acknowledging what we're being asked to do is really acknowledge and really start feeling into what are those repeating patterns that we keep either putting overt attention on to keep building, or avoiding and building it that way, the unresolved things. So these cycles, these patterns, these desires, they come up again and again, and they will come up again and again, lifetime after lifetime, until we put our attention on disidentifying, disassociating with them. And so it's helpful to start to see, you're probably quite aware of some of these issues, changes, desires, patterns, and maybe some new ones are coming up. So that's another line of inquiry that you can start to engage with, is what are those patterns? And maybe you see a pattern in one area, but you find it entirely in another. Is there a pattern of running away? Where do I see it? Where does it show up? Is there a pattern of over-identification with one thing to the exclusion of all else? Is there what are the patterns for each of us that are there are hooks, right? There are fish hooks in our, in our lines. They're the things that we find to distract us many times in this lifetime. and potentially in many lifetimes. Clue in on that. Very quickly, just when we're talking about the storm of desires, there are a few desires that we can sort of kind of look at and clue into. These are some of the names of the terms and what they mean. And you can also take a look at this and see how our desires are not just, many times we've had these desires that, we think, maybe you've thought of, we think of it in terms of these vasanas or these irrational, intense cravings that compromise your dharma. And those are, body vasana, world vasana, shastra vasana. And in the teachings, Acharya Shunya gave some in-depth contemplations on those. But desires are also, can show up in a lot of different ways that don't feel as urgent. And again, it's not that we don't have desires. It's that are we so closely identified with those desires because we don't see them as temporary. We don't see them as impermanent. So we see them as permanent. We see them as the absolute. And our focus entirely goes into these desires, whether it's biological urges, sensory gratification, the stray thought of, I wish I had, or if it's intense addictions or intense patterns. Like there's many ways in which desire and our identification with that desire, our identifying with it, our becoming that, our thinking that our whole being is around those desires happens. And so we're asked to kind of pay attention to that whole storm of desires, that happens, and see, again, there's something else. How do we find that something else? We turn again. Turn from the path of prayas to the path of shreyas, from the path of the world and fulfilling those ego desires towards the path of identifying with the self. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. We will learn more as this text goes on about those ways in which those flowers, as Rochelle reminded us, those ways in which we can turn towards Govindam. But here we're talking about the setup and that we need to. Finally, we are left, in terms of specifically about impermanence, we're left with verse 15. And if this isn't a wake-up call, these initial things are pretty hard, all right? So strength has left the old man's body. His head has become bald, his gums toothless, and he's leaning on crutches. Even then, the attachment is strong, and he clings firmly to fruitless desires. If we are not given this jnanam, this knowledge of the self, through Vedanta, through the wisdom that comes at in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the end of the Vedas, if we don't have this knowledge, and if we haven't explored it, received it, churned it, heard it, lived it, churned it some more, and integrated this knowledge into our life, even in those final moments, we're still hankering after something. And we're hankering after the unreal. We're still yearning for something. We still have, it doesn't matter how old the body gets. Again, because the body, we are not the body. The body can be on its very last legs, and still we have these unexplored desires without knowledge. So perfect timing for each of us to be here, to be listening, to be exploring, and to be learning. We keep hoping, we keep that hope alive, right? We keep hoping and desiring for life to be different. This is what's trapping us. Everything we count on to be permanent, as we see. We see it with our own eyes. We hear it with our own ears. We know it with every part of our being. And yet, we know that that's actually impermanent. And yet we don't want to look at it. What we're grieving, when we talked about what we're grieving in the past, we're not even grieving about death. We're not even grieving about the temporary nature of this life. We're just grieving about our desires not being met. We're not paying attention to what's important. This is Bhaja Govindam. Wake up. Pay attention to what's important. Life, there's an urgency here. Life is coming to a close. Things are changing. They are impermanent. So you have this life. Yours, instead of grieving about all of the things that your ego wanted that it didn't get, pay attention and know that this opportunity right now. We have an opportunity to turn towards this unchanging truth. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. So, your homework, your swadhyaya is over the next, it'll be a month, by the way. We won't be meeting for another month. I'm going to have surgery. And I will be having surgery in the beginning of March. And so I have tentatively placed March 22nd as when I'll be ready to return. I am hoping that will be the case. And I'm also working towards as well for myself to really hone in on this understanding of impermanence, and also this understanding that this is an opportunity. Turn towards God. Turn towards Govindam. Bhaja Govindam. Let's unpack and uncover and do that. Conduct that archaeological dig on our consciousness, right? Root it out, hammer away, get to what's real, get to the underneath. And so our homework together, our swadhyaya together over the next month is to start questioning all of the things that we not only think are permanent, and ask ourselves, is it permanent? Is it real? But also to do that kind of contemplation that we did earlier today, to do that contemplation and wonder, what happens if these needs aren't met? What emerges for me? What feelings come up? Where do I, and then go a little bit deeper, like Soham did, go a little bit deeper even still. And when those feelings come up, first it takes questioning. This is mananam. It takes the internal questioning. We're not just meant to hear it once and think we've got it. Take the questions, explore, find out in your everyday life. Start paying attention to where you felt betrayed by reality, where you felt cast off by reality, where you felt left aside or or what came up that wasn't pleasant, and what did you want to run away from? Like, these are all good inquiries. Start paying attention to that. These are the keys to your own experience of samsara. These are the keys to what are those thoughts that are underneath everything, underneath the happy, pleasant phase, underneath the devotional chanting, underneath the the kind thoughts and the and even the self-recrimination. Underneath all of that, what are those thoughts that you are holding that you may not even realize it? And those are the thoughts that we're going to start to really work with, because those are the thoughts that are revealed for the next time and the next time and the next time, whether in this life or in the next life. So let's do that. As a group, as a collective, you will be able to watch this recording again shortly, probably in the next day or two, probably 2 days. And in the community forum, if you want to share, we can do that as well. If you go to the page on the sessions and notes, I've also added another class. And potentially two, based on your feedback. You wanted some time to have a community circle. We'll definitely be doing that. It may be that the 22nd will be a community circle, depending on how much my energy is up, and but we may also get into the next theme. All right, and thank you for your well wishes. I appreciate that. And please, if you feel compelled and you'd like to wish me good luck on March 4th, I will receive that thankfully. All right, together, why don't we close out with our closing prayer? And our closing prayer, as always, is a deep request of that Govindam to help us define what is truth and what is not truth, to take us from this darkness of our perceived samsara into the light of truth, and to take us from this belief that what this reality is that reality is only this death cycle, this death and rebirth and death and rebirth, and into this beautiful knowledge that, like Soham shared, this home, that nectar of the self, that we come to that permanent, infinite, unchanging, ever unifying consciousness self. Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om peace, peace, peace. Jai Ma. Jai Ma, everyone. Thank you.